Jung's most disturbing transformation. When I first read about these specific Carl Jung cases, I immediately thought of you. It felt like he was writing your story. We've all encountered that gentle soul, seemingly broken by the world, only to watch them suddenly transform. We've all encountered people who apologize the most for existing, yet have the least to apologize for. This phenomenon isn't new. It's a pattern so profound that Carl Jung himself documented it, calling it one of the most challenging and terrifying psychological shifts he ever witnessed. It's the moment the deeply sensitive individual, what I call the awakened one, integrates their shadow. Jung spent decades studying what happened when extreme empathy met psychological betrayal, and what he discovered about the kindest people still sends shivers down the spines of modern psychologists. The foundational truth is this: the kindest people are not weak, they are simply weapons waiting to be forged. Jung's extensive case files from his Zurich clinic revealed a chilling, repeatable psychological blueprint. Patient after patient arrived bearing identical wounds. These were highly sensitive individuals, empaths, who had been systematically dismantled by the very people who claimed to cherish them. They presented with physical symptoms they rationalized away, debilitating depression they self-blamed, and a pervasive universal tendency to seek forgiveness simply for taking up space. Jung meticulously documented their core function. These individuals had spent their entire lives functioning as emotional shock absorbers for their social circles. They were repositories for collective psychological pain, absorbing the rages of alcoholic parents, the fallout from a spouse's infidelity, or the general dysfunction of family systems. They were living proof of Jung's theory that highly sensitive people become targets for the collective's unintegrated darkness. Here is the observation that truly unsettled Jung. These empaths didn't just endure the abuse, they inadvertently systematized it. When Jung prompted them to describe their relationships, he expected the confused, scattered narratives of damaged minds. Instead, he uncovered a revolutionary truth about the empathic mind. They hadn't merely been broken by the abuse, they had been studying it. Jung realized the empath's mind operated not as a victim's tear-stained diary, but as a strategist's silent war room, storing information and waiting for an unimaginable point of activation. Jung discovered that these empaths maintained a flawless mental catalog of every person who had ever inflicted pain upon them. They knew the abuser's deep-seated insecurities, their hidden triggers, and their profoundest fears. They had been mapping emotional patterns with surgical, almost clinical precision. The shocking part was that they had never once, until that snapping point, utilized this massive store of information. If you've ever felt that people profoundly underestimate your level of awareness, realize this: you, like Jung's patients, are a psychological genius in hiding. Their unique capability wasn't in creating things, but in emotional archaeology. They could excavate a person's most protected psychological wounds by observing only the slightest micro-expressions. Jung put their abilities to the test, introducing colleagues without providing any prior context. Within minutes, the empaths could identify childhood traumas, relationship histories, and professional anxieties with an accuracy rate that consistently surpassed 95%. What caused Jung to tremble as he wrote his notes was the fact that this wasn't psychic ability. It was pure, highly advanced attention. What others labeled intuition, these empaths called data collection. Jung began to understand that empaths don't just feel more deeply, they process emotional data faster and more accurately than the average human. Their brain is uniquely wired for pattern recognition in human behavior. Unfortunately, society had conditioned them to view this gift as a liability, labeling their attempts to expose lies, manipulation, or hidden agendas as too sensitive or overly emotional. They were forced to silence their own perceptions and apologize for seeing the truth. But truth doesn't vanish when it's suppressed. It accumulates. And in these cases, it had been accumulating for decades. Jung realized they weren't suffering nervous breakdowns. They were experiencing breakthroughs.
The transformation Jung witnessed was not gradual. It was a sudden, explosive moment, a textbook example of shadow integration under extreme duress. The consistent trigger was always a profound act of betrayal, committed by a person the empath had completely trusted and protected. Whether it was infidelity, financial deceit, or devastating emotional manipulation, the core devastation wasn't the act itself, but the agonizing realization. They had seen the signs all along and had deliberately ignored them. As is typical for the unintegrated empath, they said nothing, absorbed the pain, and redoubled their efforts to be the perfect partner or friend. Then came the clarity event, the moment their sophisticated pattern recognition finally overwhelmed their psychological need to believe the best in people. Most people, especially the abusers, expected the empath to dissolve into emotional chaos, screaming and crying. What transpired was the opposite, a reaction that terrified everyone. The empaths became unnaturally calm. Jung documented this as the precise moment when the individual fully merged their advanced analytical skills with their emotional intelligence. They didn't lash out and they didn't rage. They simply began to speak their truth. With chilling clinical precision, like a surgeon identifying diseased tissue, they revealed everything they had cataloged, observed, and silently endured. This was not revenge, it was clarity. They were finally employing their complete perception gift not to excuse, but to expose the behavior. Jung realized this transformation was the profound act of shadow integration, the moment they ceased denying the intelligent, intuitive, and strong parts of themselves they had been taught to hide. The empath's shadow wasn't evil, it was their suppressed power. Once integrated, they achieved what Jung termed psychological completeness.
What made these cases so profoundly disturbing for Jung was the permanence of the transformation. These individuals never regressed into people-pleasing. They refused to apologize for their newfound boundaries, and they never again questioned their own perception. They had become the single most formidable force for any manipulator, an empath who could no longer be controlled. Their lives transformed within months. Abusive relationships were exited with strategic precision. Toxic family ties were severed without emotional drama, and new lives were built on their own, secure terms. They became selectively empathetic, still profoundly caring, but strategically discerning about where that care was invested. The most unsettling result was the effect their presence had on others. People who had once taken them for granted suddenly felt palpable nervousness around them. Jung identified this as the predator's instinct. Manipulative individuals can sense when their usual psychological tactics are neutralized. They avoided the integrated empath like vampires avoid sunlight. Jung noted that the awakened empath's power doesn't need to be announced. Others feel it in their core. In later years, Jung tracked these post-integration patients and discovered they became extraordinarily successful. They were flawless decision-makers because they trusted their complete intuitive intelligence. Jung realized a terrifying truth. These empaths hadn't become less empathetic, but perfectly empathetic, which made them perfectly strategic. They could, if they chose, manipulate others as effortlessly as they had once been manipulated. Yet they universally chose not to use this power destructively. They simply removed toxic people and moved forward. Jung's final conclusion was that he had witnessed the birth of the integrated empath, someone who possesses both the profound sensitivity to feel everything and the absolute wisdom to choose what deserves their energy. Their transformation was a fundamental truth about empathic psychology. Empaths are not naturally victims, they are naturally powerful. Society simply teaches them to suppress that power. When they finally snap, they aren't breaking, they are awakening to their original full potential. Jung's legacy is the understanding that the empath's journey is not from sensitivity to numbness, but from unconscious absorption to conscious strategic choice.